The alarm shrieked across the cold morning air at Marine Corps Mountain Warfare Training Center. On the 500-yard rifle range, 30 trainees in full combat gear stood in perfect formation, all except one. Jordan Blake stood off to the side near the admin building, a clipboard clutched against her chest, wire-rimmed glasses sliding down her nose. Her office uniform hung loose on her small frame, the black dress shoes looking absurdly delicate compared to the heavy combat boots surrounding her. "Who let the office girl onto my range?" Staff Sergeant Drake Vance's voice boomed from the center of the formation, followed by a wave of laughter from the trainees. A muscular man in the front row lobbed a leather glove directly at Jordan's feet. It hit the dirt with a dry smack. "Out of the way, paperwork princess. This is a combat zone, not a filing cabinet." Jordan didn't look up. She simply stepped back, adjusted her glasses, and moved to the side. But in that brief moment, a detail emerged that no one noticed. Her posture shifted into parade rest hands, locked precisely behind her back shoulders, squared at exactly 180 degrees weight, distributed with mathematical precision. The stance of someone who'd held it thousands of times. No one paid attention. Vance turned away, barking orders for the team to resume formation. But from the corner of the range, Master Gunnery Sergeant Victor Stone, an NCO with 30 years of service etched into the lines of his weathered face, narrowed his eyes at the small woman. Something about her movement pattern, the way she carried herself despite the oversized uniform. In the next 20 minutes, everyone on this training ground would learn a lesson they'd never forget. Jordan retreated toward the admin building as the formation began their morning drills. Through the open window, she overheard Vance briefing his senior staff. "Safety observer, more bureaucratic nonsense from command. She'll stay out of our way and write her little reports. We run this facility our way." Laughter rippled through the group. Jordan's pen paused over her clipboard for half a second before continuing its notes. Her expression remained neutral, but her eyes tracked every detail of the range setup, exits equipment placement, the slight wobble in the third target stand that no one else seemed to notice. By 0900 hours, the mess hall had filled with over 40 personnel, grabbing breakfast before the day's exercises. Jordan sat alone at a corner table, her tray containing plain oatmeal and black coffee. She kept her eyes down, reviewing training schedules while eating methodically. "Does she even know which end of a rifle the bullets come out of?" Madison Pierce's voice carried across the entire hall. The 24-year-old trainee had positioned herself at the central table, surrounded by a dozen admirers hanging on her every word. "I heard she's here to evaluate our safety protocols. Can you imagine someone who probably screams at a stapler jam is going to tell Marines how to handle weapons?" The laughter that followed was louder this time, more personal. Jordan's hand didn't shake as she lifted her coffee cup, but Sergeant Paul Griffin, the mess hall supervisor, wiping down nearby tables, watched her face carefully. Not a flicker of reaction. Either she genuinely didn't care, or she had discipline most of his Marines would envy. When Jordan stood to refill her coffee, Griffin noticed something odd. She automatically scanned the room in a clockwise pattern, her gaze lingering for precise moments on the exits. The fire extinguisher mounted near the kitchen, the electrical panel, the first aid kit. Her assessment took perhaps 3 seconds, and she probably didn't even realize she'd done it. But Griffin had seen that same scanning pattern in every combat veteran who'd ever walked through his mess hall doors. Lieutenant Tyler Brennan approached Jordan's desk in the admin office at 0930 hours. He didn't knock, simply pushed through the door and planted both hands on her desk, leaning forward in what he clearly considered an intimidating posture. "Blake, let's establish some ground rules. Your job is paperwork, administrative support. You don't touch training equipment, you don't speak to my instructors during exercises, and you definitely don't slow down our operation. Are we clear?" Jordan looked up from her computer screen, meeting his eyes for exactly 2 seconds before responding. "Crystal clear, sir." Her voice was soft, almost deferential. Brennan seemed satisfied, turning on his heel and leaving without another word. What he didn't see was the way Jordan's left hand had automatically positioned itself at a 45-degree angle on the desk, the exact hand placement for accessing a sidearm holster that wasn't there. The movement had been pure instinct muscle memory, overriding conscious thought. She caught herself and returned both hands to the keyboard. On the range, Private Jackson Moore was struggling with his M4 disassembly during a timed drill. His hands fumbled with the bolt carrier group, sweat beading on his forehead, as Vance's stopwatch ticked loudly. Jordan happened to walk past the observation window on her way to deliver paperwork. Her eyes tracked Moore's movements for perhaps 2 seconds. She saw the problem immediately. He was trying to remove the bolt before properly seating the charging handle. Her lips parted, the correction forming automatically. Charging handle first, then rotate the cam pin. She caught herself before the words escaped her hand, rising to adjust her glasses instead. She turned away and continued walking. No one had noticed her near slip except Master Gunny Stone, who'd been observing from his position near the armory. His eyes followed Jordan as she disappeared into the admin building. If you're watching this story unfold and already feeling the tension, you're not alone. What happens when the person everyone underestimates turns out to be exactly who they needed all along? The story you're watching right now is just getting started, and trust me, the next 10 minutes will completely change how you see quiet competence. If you're enjoying this twist so far, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we've got dozens of stories like this one where underdogs shock everyone around them. Don't miss what comes next. This moment is about to explode in ways nobody saw coming. Morning formation at 1100 hours saw Vance assigning positions for the afternoon exercises. Blake, you'll observe from the admin deck overlooking the range. Stay up there. Stay invisible. We need to maintain focus on training, not babysitting civilians. Connor Hayes, the team leader standing to Vance's right, smirked openly. The implication was clear. Jordan was a distraction, a liability dead weight that command had forced upon them. Jordan climbed the metal stairs to the observation deck without comment. Once there, she set down her clipboard and looked out over the range. For just a moment, less than 2 seconds, her body shifted. Feet shoulder-width apart, weight forward on the balls of her feet. Right hand extended as if gripping a rifle. Left hand supporting eyeline, tracking down an invisible barrel toward the target's 400 yards downrange. Perfect shooting stance. Then she caught herself, straightened her glasses, and sat down with her clipboard like nothing had happened. At 1300 hours, Corporal Ryan Tucker physically blocked Jordan from entering the main briefing room. Safety briefing is for qualified personnel only. Civilians aren't cleared. He didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. His body language made it clear she wasn't welcome. Jordan nodded once and turned away. Tucker didn't see the way her jaw tightened for half a second, or the way her hands formed fists at her sides before deliberately relaxing. Dr. Nina Cross, the base psychologist passing in the hallway, did see it though. She made a mental note to check on Jordan later. The range went hot at 1400 hours. 30 trainees lined up, each firing their assigned M4 carbine at targets ranging from 100 to 300 yards. Jordan sat on the observation deck, pen moving steadily across her notepad. But when a distinctive metallic click echoed from Station 7, a sound barely audible over the ongoing gunfire, her pen froze mid-word. Her head turned sharply toward the source. Failure to extract. The bolt hadn't fully cycled. 3 full seconds before Range Safety Officer Captain David Morrison identified the malfunction and called the ceasefire, Jordan had already diagnosed it from sound alone. Master Gunny Stone, observing from ground level, saw Jordan's reaction, saw the immediate recognition, the professional assessment, the restraint that kept her from calling out the malfunction herself. He filed that observation away with growing interest. Lunch at 1700 hours brought another mess hall scene. Sergeant Griffin watched Jordan enter, collect her tray, and find the same isolated corner table, but this time he paid attention to the small details. The way she folded her napkin into a perfect military square, the kind of crisp fold that came from years of habit, not conscious effort. The way she positioned her utensils at the 420 position after finishing each course, a subtle indication of military table manners. The way she sat with her back to the wall, facing the entrance, maintaining clear sightlines to both exits. Griffin had served 22 years. He knew the difference between someone playing at military bearing and someone who'd lived it so long it became unconscious. Jordan Blake wasn't mimicking anything. She was forgetting to hide. Dr. Nina Cross approached Jordan's table during dessert service. She didn't ask permission, simply sat down across from her. "How are you holding up?" The question seemed casual, but her eyes held concern. The transition can be difficult. Jordan glanced up briefly. "I'm fine, doctor." The response was automatic, practiced. But there was a subtext in those 3 words, an acknowledgement that both women knew more than they were saying. Cross nodded once and left without pushing further. But several trainees had noticed the exchange. Why would the base psychologist be checking on some random admin clerk? The afternoon drill at 1830 hours showcased close-quarters battle entry techniques. Vance personally demonstrated the proper method for clearing a doorway, talking through each step as he moved. But his sequence was wrong. He'd inverted the order of the 2-man entry, putting the second operator in the fatal funnel before clearing the near corner. Jordan's hand twitched, rising halfway from her lap before she forced it back down. Her mouth moved silently, forming the correction she couldn't voice. Near corner, first then far. Never expose 2 operators simultaneously. She thought no one had noticed, but Master Gunny Stone had positioned himself close enough to observe. He couldn't hear her words, but he could read her body language. The frustration of someone who knew better, forced to watch incompetence play out, because protocol demanded her silence. The evening armory check at 1900 hours required Jordan to deliver supply requisition forms to Technical Sergeant Robert Miller. She entered the secured room, keeping her eyes down and professional, but as she handed over the paperwork, her gaze happened to sweep across the weapon racks. For perhaps 2 seconds, her eyes tracked along the displayed M4 carbines. Then she blinked and refocused on Miller's face as he signed the forms. Miller had been an armory chief for 12 years. He'd watched that exact same visual sweep performed by every weapons inspector who'd ever entered his domain. Except Jordan supposedly wasn't an inspector, she was a clerk. Yet, she'd just performed a serial number verification scan, checking 3 rifles in the span of 2 seconds, identifying discrepancies so subtle that most Marines would never notice them without physically removing the weapons and checking the stamps directly. "Something wrong with the inventory, ma'am." Miller's voice was carefully neutral. Jordan's eyes refocused on him. "No, Sergeant. Everything looks maintained." She took her copies of the forms and left quickly. Miller pulled the 3 rifles she'd glanced at. All 3 had serial number inconsistencies in their maintenance logs. Weapons that had been reported as sent for depot-level repair, yet somehow remained in his inventory. Someone had been cutting corners on documentation. Jordan had spotted it in a 2-second glance. Day 2 began, with Jordan reviewing incident reports from the previous year. Sitting alone in her office at 0600 hours, she spread printouts across her desk. Near-miss reports, equipment failures, safety violations. Her analysis went beyond simple documentation. She'd organized them geographically temporally, by equipment type, by personnel involved. Color-coded sticky notes marked patterns that command had apparently missed. This wasn't the work of an administrative assistant. This was tactical-level threat assessment. Modern medical technology has revolutionized how we monitor health in high-stress environments, something that becomes critical when split-second decisions matter. Advanced wearable health devices now offer military-grade monitoring that tracks vital signs, stress levels, and physical performance in real time. These medical-grade systems can detect irregular heart rhythms, monitor blood oxygen saturation, and even predict potential health issues before they become critical. For military personnel, first responders, and anyone in high-stakes professions, this technology isn't just convenient, it's potentially life-saving. These devices provide continuous health data that can be transmitted instantly to medical teams, ensuring that even in the most demanding situations, your body's warning signs won't go unnoticed. Range observation at 0900 hours brought the first direct confrontation. Private Moore's weapon jammed during a firing sequence. He froze fingers still on the trigger panic visible in his posture. The range safety officer was 20 yards away, moving toward him. But before Morrison could arrive, a voice cut through the noise, sharp, clear, carrying the unmistakable tone of command. Tap, rack, assess. Moore's body responded before his brain processed who'd spoken. His hand performed the malfunction drill perfectly. Tap the magazine rack. The charging handle, assess the weapon's condition. The jam cleared. The rifle was safe. He looked up at the observation deck where Jordan stood, her hands gripping the railing, her entire bearing transformed for that single moment from clerk to instructor. The moment passed. Jordan's shoulders hunched slightly. Her hands released the railing, and she became small again. But at least 15 Marines had witnessed the exchange, had heard the authority in her voice, had seen Moore respond with the instant obedience of a trainee to a qualified instructor. Staff Sergeant Vance stormed toward the observation deck stairs. His boots hammered against the metal treads as he climbed. He didn't knock on the deck door, simply threw it open. "Stay, in, your lane." Each word punctuated with barely controlled fury. "You are not a trainer. You are not qualified to give instructions to my Marines. You are a paper pusher who is here on a technicality. Do you understand me?" Jordan met his eyes. For 3 full seconds she held his gaze without blinking, without backing down. The air between them crackled with tension. Then deliberately she looked back down at her clipboard. "Understood, Sergeant." Her voice was soft again, deferential, but Vance felt unsettled as he descended the stairs. That look in her eyes, it hadn't been fear or submission. It had been assessment. The tension is building, isn't it? If you're as hooked as I am right now, do me a favor, smash that like button so more people can experience this story. Every clue we've seen so far is leading somewhere massive, and you won't want to miss the payoff. Stay locked in because the biggest revelation is closer than you think. The mess hall at 1200 hours became a stage for social warfare. Madison Pierce had gathered her usual crowd at the center table, speaking just loudly enough to ensure Jordan could hear from her isolated corner. Maybe she dated a Marine once, thinks that makes her tactical. Laughter rippled through the group. I bet she Googled military terms before showing up. Probably practiced saying tap rack in the mirror. Connor Hayes sat at Pierce's table, but his attention wasn't on the crude jokes. He was watching Jordan's face, watching for any reaction, anger, hurt, embarrassment. He saw nothing. Jordan continued eating her lunch with mechanical efficiency, her expression neutral, her body language completely unchanged. That bothered him more than a reaction would have. He'd seen raw recruits crack under far less pressure, yet this small woman who looked like a strong wind might blow her over showed no emotional response whatsoever. Either she genuinely didn't care what they thought, or she had discipline that surpassed most of his team. Neither option fit the narrative they had built around her. At 1400 hours, a trainee named Williams suffered a deep laceration on his hand from improperly maintained equipment. Corporal Lisa Chen, the base medical specialist, was treating him in the medical bay when Jordan entered to drop off supply request forms. Chen had wrapped the wound, but the bandaging was sloppy, too loose wrong angle, no proper pressure point control for a hand injury of that type. Jordan set down her paperwork, then paused, her eyes fixed on the injured hand. For a long moment she seemed to wrestle with something internal. Then quietly, "May I?" Chen looked up surprised. "What?" "The bandaging. It's not. May I show you a more effective method?" Chen's professional pride bristled slightly, but something in Jordan's tone, not condescending, almost apologetic, made her step back. "Sure." Jordan moved with sudden efficiency. She unwrapped Chen's work-applied pressure to the correct point on Williams's wrist with her thumb, and rewrapped the wound with practiced precision. The sequence took perhaps 20 seconds. When she finished, the bandage sat perfectly firm enough to control bleeding angled to avoid nerve compression, wrapped with a specific pattern that any field medic would recognize as tactical combat casualty care protocol. Chen stared at the finished work. "Where did you learn that?" Her voice carried genuine curiosity, now not mockery. Jordan's hands stilled. "YouTube," she said softly, then gathered her paperwork and left quickly. Chen watched her go, then looked down at the bandaging. YouTube. She didn't believe that for a second. She'd been a medical specialist for 4 years and couldn't wrap a hand injury that efficiently. But she said nothing, simply made a mental note to pay more attention to Jordan Blake. The afternoon live-fire exercise preparation involved a safety brief conducted by Connor Hayes. He stood before 20 trainees going through the standard protocols. Remember, the dead man's zone extends 3 feet on either side of the door frame. Never position yourself there during entry. From her observation post, Jordan's lips moved silently. Fatal funnel. She wasn't aware she'd spoken aloud, but Master Gunny Stone had positioned himself close enough to catch the correction. Dead man's zone was civilian terminology. Fatal funnel was the proper tactical term, one that only people with advanced close-quarters combat training would use automatically. Stone didn't interrupt the brief, but as Hayes continued, Stone moved closer to the admin building, studying Jordan through the observation window. The more he watched, the more details accumulated. The way she assessed sight lines, the way her body automatically positioned itself in the most defensible corner of any room, the way her breathing pattern changed when weapons fire began, not fear, but controlled focus, the pattern recognition of someone who'd spent years in combat environments. At 1600 hours, Stone approached Jordan during a scheduled break. He didn't announce himself, simply walked up and stood at modified parade. Rest a sign of respect. Senior NCO to someone he considered a potential peer, not a civilian. "Excuse me, ma'am, may I ask a personal question?" Jordan looked up from her clipboard, surprise flickering across her face before she schooled it back to neutral. "Of course, Master Gunnery Sergeant. Are you prior service, direct, professional?" No accusation in his tone, just genuine curiosity. Jordan's response came after a calculated pause. "I'm an administrative specialist, Master Gunnery Sergeant. My background is in organizational management and safety protocol documentation." Technically true, not exactly a lie, but not the full truth either. Stone heard what she didn't say as clearly as what she did. He nodded slowly. "Of course, ma'am. My apologies." But his eyes lingered on her for an extra moment before he walked away. Something didn't add up, and Stone had learned over 30 years to trust his instincts when something felt off. That night alone in the admin office after 2100 hours, Jordan removed her jacket in the privacy of the locked room. She rolled her shoulders, stretching muscles sore from maintaining her hunched posture all day. For just a moment, she stood at her full height, shoulders back, spine straight. In that moment, she looked completely different, taller, more solid, unmistakably military bearing. She reached for a bottle of water on the filing cabinet, and her shirt sleeve rode up her shoulder. The edge of a tattoo became visible, vibrant colors, the distinctive red and gold of the Marine Corps emblem. She caught sight of it in the reflection of her dark computer screen, and immediately tugged the sleeve down, glancing around even though she knew she was alone. No one had seen, but the near miss rattled her. She was getting careless, letting the mask slip. She needed to be more careful. Day 3 brought a shift in atmosphere. Vance announced during morning formation that they'd be conducting a stress test day, full combat simulation, with live ammunition, dynamic entry scenarios, and compressed timelines designed to push trainees beyond their comfort zones. "We're also making a slight modification," Vance added with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Blake, you'll be observing from the hot zone today. Safety protocols require administrative oversight at ground level." Several trainees exchanged glances. Putting a civilian in the hot zone during live fire exercises wasn't standard procedure. It was deliberate either to scare her into requesting transfer or to create an excuse to remove her if she panicked. Jordan's expression didn't change. She simply nodded acknowledgement. Before the exercise began, Jordan performed her assigned duty conducting a pre-exercise equipment check. She moved down the line of rifles designated for use, examining each one with what appeared to be cursory attention, but her eyes caught details. 2 weapons had headspace issues. The gap between the bolt face and barrel was outside acceptable tolerances. Both were minor, the kind of thing that might not cause immediate malfunction, but significantly increase the risk of catastrophic failure under sustained fire. She documented both issues and brought her findings to Vance. "Sergeant Weapons 7 and 12 show headspace discrepancies. I recommend pulling them for armory-level inspection before use." Vance barely glanced at her report. "I'll decide what's safe on my range, Blake. Those weapons passed inspection yesterday. They're good to go." "Sergeant, the measurements indicate." "Are you a qualified armorer?" His voice cut through her objection. "No, Sergeant." "Then I'll thank you to let the professionals handle weapons safety. Go back to your observation position." Jordan's jaw tightened. She wanted to push harder to explain that the measurements didn't lie, that headspace issues had killed Marines in training accidents before. But she couldn't reveal how she'd identified the problem so precisely without proper tools. Couldn't explain why a civilian clerk could recognize a .003-inch discrepancy by visual inspection alone. So, she retreated, her hands gripping her clipboard hard enough that her knuckles went white. Master Gunny Stone pulled Colonel James Harrington aside before the exercise began. "Sir, I need to voice a concern about Blake." Harrington looked up from his tablet. "The administrative contractor. What about her?" "Sir, something about her doesn't add up. The way she moves the things, she notices her reactions to combat situations. She's not what she appears to be." Harrington frowned. "Price, she's been thoroughly vetted by command. Her background check came back clean. She's exactly what her paperwork says, a civilian contractor with expertise in safety protocols and administrative management. You're seeing shadows where there aren't any. With respect, sir, I've been doing this job for 30 years. I know the difference between a civilian and someone with combat experience. Blake has all the markers of prior service." Then why wouldn't she disclose that Harrington's patience was wearing thin? If she had military experience, it would only strengthen her qualifications for this assignment. There'd be no reason to hide it. Stone had no answer for that logic. He stepped back. "Aye, sir. My apologies." But he didn't stop watching Jordan. The exercise went live at 1400 hours. Trainees moved through urban warfare scenarios, clearing rooms, engaging targets, communicating under stress. Jordan stood in her assigned position at the edge of the hot zone, close enough to observe details, but supposedly out of the direct line of fire. Her clipboard remained in her hands, but her eyes tracked every movement with analytical precision. At 1420 hours, Weapon 7-1 of the rifle she'd flagged underwent catastrophic failure. Private Derek Hayes Connor's younger brother was executing a fire and movement drill. He'd fired perhaps 15 rounds when the bolt carrier group separated mid-cycle. The metal component shot backward, catching Derek directly in the face. He went down hard, blood immediately visible, his hands clutching his face as a scream tore from his throat. "Corpseman!" Connor's voice cracked with panic as he saw his brother fall. The designated medic was positioned 100 yards back per standard protocol. At a sprint, he needed at least 30 seconds to reach the casualty. Derek's screaming indicated a clear airway, but head wounds bled profusely. Shock could set in within minutes, and depending on what the bolt carrier had struck, there could be orbital fractures, brain trauma, arterial damage. Vance stood frozen, his face pale, his rifle malfunction, his decision to override Blake's warning, his responsibility. The medic was running, but the distance was too great. Jordan didn't think. Her clipboard hit the ground as she exploded into motion. She covered the 40 yards between her position and Derek in 8 seconds, flat, a sprint speed that no desk worker could maintain. She dropped into a slide beside him, her small frame suddenly looking solid and capable as her hands reached for his face with absolute certainty. "Airway clear." Jordan's voice cut through Derek's screams with clinical precision. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, one applying direct pressure to the facial wound, while the other stabilized his neck. No arterial spray. Laceration is superficial, likely zygomatic arch impact, possible orbital fracture. The technical terminology flowed naturally, unconsciously. These weren't words from a first aid manual. This was field trauma assessment, the kind performed under fire when seconds determined survival. Derek's hands clawed at hers, panic overriding reason. Jordan's voice dropped lower, calmer. "Derek, look at me. Look right at me. You're going to be fine. The bleeding looks worse than it is. I need you to stay still. Can you do that for me, Marine?" Something in her tone, the absolute certainty, the command presence cut through his panic. Derek's body went still, his eyes locking onto hers. She maintained eye contact while her hands continued their assessment, palpating the wound margins, checking for bone fragments, monitoring pupil response. Corporal Lisa Chen arrived, first medical kit already open. She started to take over, then paused. Jordan had positioned Derek's head in perfect spinal alignment, applied pressure to the precise bleeding points, and maintained airway protection. The positioning was textbook tactical combat. Casualty care level 2, field trauma response that took 6 weeks of intensive training to master. "Holy cow," Chen breathed. That's exactly right. The full medic team arrived seconds later. They took over smoothly, but one of them, a Navy corpsman named Rodriguez, looked at Jordan's work and then at her face. "Ma'am, where did you train? That's TCCC protocol, perfect execution." Jordan stood, her hands covered in Derek's blood. She didn't answer the question. Instead, she turned to face Vance, who stood 10 feet away, his face ashen. Her voice came out quiet, but carrying across the suddenly silent range. "That rifle had a 3mm headspace gap. I told you, sir." The weight of those words hung in the air. Every Marine on that range understood the implication. She'd identified a critical safety issue. He'd dismissed it. A man had been injured as a direct result. Colonel Harrington's vehicle pulled up at the range entrance, alerted by the medical emergency call. He stepped out, taking in the scene, the wounded Marine being loaded onto a stretcher, the blood on the ground, the frozen expressions of everyone present. "Someone explain what happened. Now." Vance opened his mouth, but Jordan spoke first. "Sir, equipment failure during live fire. I documented the weapon's condition 48 hours ago in my safety assessment report." She reached into her pocket, the motion making several nearby Marines instinctively tense, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She handed it to Harrington. "The highlighted section, sir. Weapons 7 and 12. Both showed headspace discrepancies outside acceptable tolerances. I recommended immediate removal for depot-level inspection." Harrington read the document, his face darkening. He looked at Vance. "Sergeant, did you receive this report?" "Sir, I assessed that the weapons were serviceable. They passed yesterday's inspection." "Blake, are you qualified to assess weapon headspace?" Harrington cut him off, turning to Jordan. The question hung in the air. Jordan's answer would reveal much. She met his eyes steadily. "I have familiarity with weapons maintenance protocols, sir." Lieutenant Brennan, who'd been standing nearby, saw an opportunity. "Sir, with respect, she's not certified as an armorer. She has no authority to make technical assessments about weapon safety. This injury isn't Sergeant Vance's fault. It's a mechanical failure that could have happened to any weapon." Master Gunny Stone stepped forward before anyone else could speak. "Then perhaps the lieutenant can explain how a civilian clerk with no weapons training just performed combat life-saving procedures that require 6 weeks of specialized school to learn properly." His voice carried the weight of 3 decades of experience. "That was TCCC protocol textbook perfect. I've seen combat medics with less proficiency." The observation shifted something in the atmosphere. Heads turned toward Jordan, who'd been slowly backing away from the center of attention. Chen spoke up, her voice thoughtful. "Master Gunny's right. When I was treating Williams yesterday, Blake corrected my bandaging technique. The wrap she used was field medic level. I didn't think about it at the time, but now..." And she identified a weapon malfunction by sound alone, before the range safety officer called it. Added Captain Morrison, who'd been silent until now. "Day 1, Station 7, failure to extract. She reacted 3 seconds before I confirmed it." Vance tried to regain control. "This is all speculation based on..." She told Private Moore exactly how to clear a weapon jam using proper terminology. Interrupted Connor Hayes. His voice was quiet but firm. He looked at Jordan with new assessment in his eyes. "Tap rack assess. She didn't hesitate. She didn't have to think about it. That was muscle memory." Jordan felt the walls closing in. Too many observations piling up. Too many people putting pieces together. She needed to deflect, to retreat back into her role. "I read military manuals as part of my preparation for this assignment. Basic weapon terminology isn't classified. Anyone could learn it. The napkin folding." Sergeant Griffin's voice came from the edge of the crowd. The mess hall supervisor had followed the commotion. "She folds her napkin in a perfect military square every meal. Hospital corners, the kind of fold that comes from boot camp from years of inspections. You don't learn that from reading manuals." Stone pressed forward. "And her stance. Watch how she stands." He gestured to Jordan. "Even now, even trying to look small, she's in a modified interview stance. Feet positioned for rapid movement. Weight forward, hands positioned where a weapon would be. That's not something you pick up from observation. That's training so deep, it becomes unconscious." Jordan's heart rate accelerated. This was spiraling out of control. She'd been so careful, but the injury had forced her hand. She'd reacted on instinct, and now the mask was crumbling. She took another step back. "I should file my incident report. Colonel, if you'll excuse me." "No." Harrington's voice stopped her. "I don't think so, Blake. Or should I say something else?" He pulled out his tablet, fingers moving rapidly across the screen. "You've been here 3 weeks. In that time, you've displayed technical knowledge that shouldn't exist in your background. Master Gunny Stone is one of the most experienced NCOs in this command. If he says something doesn't add up, I listen." Vance, desperate to shift blame away from his own negligence, seized the opportunity. "Sir, I tried to remove her from the range after she interfered with Private Moore's training. She resisted. It was a gross exaggeration of their earlier confrontation, but Vance was in survival mode now. Resisted how? Harrington's tone was sharp. Vance hesitated, knowing how weak it would sound. She challenged my authority, questioned my decisions. By being correct about a safety violation that just put a Marine in the hospital, Stone's voice dripped with contempt. Harrington held up a hand for silence. He looked at Jordan, really looked at her for the first time. Blake, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. Are you prior service? Jordan's mind raced. She could maintain the lie stick to her cover, but the mission was already compromised. Too many people had seen too much. And most critically, Derek Hayes was alive because she'd been close enough to respond. If she'd maintained her distance, played her role perfectly, he might have bled out waiting for the medic. Sometimes the mission had to adapt. Administrative specialist was technically accurate, sir. Her voice was quiet but steady. That was my most recent position. Most recent position in what organization? The moment stretched. Jordan could feel 40 pairs of eyes on her. She thought about Corporal Davies the Marine, who died last year because safety protocols had been ignored. She thought about the 87 pages of violations she'd documented. She thought about the real reason she had accepted this assignment. Before she could answer, Vance made a critical mistake. He was angry, humiliated, desperate to reassert dominance. He strode toward Jordan aggressively. I want you off this base, today. You've disrupted my training schedule, undermined my authority, and... He reached for her arm, intending to physically steer her away from the colonel. His hand closed around her upper arm, gripping hard, trying to push her toward the parking area. Jordan's body responded before her mind could override it. Pure muscle memory took over. Her arm rotated inward, breaking his grip with a textbook wrist release. She stepped through his guard, her hand finding his elbow controlling the joint. In one fluid motion, she could have completed the arm lock, could have put him face down on the ground. But she caught herself mid-technique, stopping the movement just as his balance broke. Vance staggered backward, shock written across his face. The speed of her response, the precision of the technique, it was undeniable now. In his stumbling retreat, his hand caught her shirt collar. The fabric, already stressed from the day's activities, tore. The rip extended from her collar down across her shoulder, the sound of fabric giving way, audible across the silent range. Jordan tried to pull away to cover herself, but it was too late. The tattoo was fully visible now, spanning her right shoulder, unmistakable in its detail, the eagle globe and anchor the emblem of the United States Marine Corps. But it wasn't just the standard emblem. Arched above it in precise military lettering, MCMAP, Black Belt Instructor. Below the emblem, 3 stars indicating combat deployments, and cutting through the colored ink, a distinctive scar-patterned shrapnel damaged the kind of injury that told its own story of violence survived. For 3 full seconds, absolute silence blanketed the range. 40 Marines frozen in place. The only sound was the wind across the California mountains and Derek's labored breathing as the medics prepared to transport him. Private Jackson Moore was the first to break the silence. His voice came out as barely a whisper. Oh my God. Master Gunnery Sergeant Victor Stone's body moved on pure instinct. He stepped forward sharply, came to full attention, and rendered the crispest salute Jordan had seen since leaving active duty. His voice rang out with absolute certainty. Gunnery Sergeant. The title hit the assembled Marines like a shockwave. Vance's face drained of all color. His mouth opened and closed, no sound emerging. He took 2 stumbling steps backward, nearly tripping over his own feet. Connor Hayes' eyes were locked on the tattoo, his hand unconsciously moving into parade rest position. His lips formed words silently processing the impossible reality in front of him. Lieutenant Brennan stammered, That's not... How is that possible? Madison Pierce's phone slipped from her hand, clattering on the concrete pad with a sharp crack that made several people flinch. Corporal Tucker stood frozen mid-step, his earlier dismissiveness transformed into dawning horror as he realized who he'd been, excluding from briefings. The crowd reaction cascaded outward. Phones appeared, 8, 10, 12 Marines, pulling out devices to capture this moment. Gasps rippled through the assembled personnel. 2 junior Marines actually snapped to attention, instinctively their bodies responding to the implied rank before their minds caught up. Sergeant Griffin, watching from the mess hall entrance, allowed himself a slow smile. He'd known something was off. Now it made perfect sense. Dr. Nina Cross, standing near her vehicle, simply nodded once. She'd known all along. Patient confidentiality had prevented her from revealing Jordan's background, but she'd been monitoring her former patient's psychological state throughout this assignment. The atmosphere had transformed completely. Where there had been mockery and dismissal, now there was shock. Where there had been casual disrespect, now there was the beginning of something else entirely. The voices began overlapping. Is that a black belt instructor rating? How many Marines even have that? 3 deployment stars. That's Iraq and Afghanistan. Has to be. How did we not know? Wait, we've been mocking a gunny. Oh man, we've been mocking a gunnery sergeant. Private Moore turned to the Marine beside him, his voice breaking slightly. She helped me. When my weapon jammed, she helped me, and I didn't even thank her. Sergeant Marcus Williams, an older NCO who'd remained neutral throughout Jordan's time, on base slowly shook his head. I should have seen it. The bearing was always there. I just wasn't looking. Captain Morrison keyed his radio with shaking hands. Base Command, we have a situation developing at Range 7, requesting senior leadership presence immediately. We're approaching the moment everything changes. If your heart is racing right now, you're not alone. Thousands of viewers are on the edge of their seats with you. Quick reminder to hit subscribe if you haven't already, because what's about to be revealed will leave you speechless. The next 5 minutes will answer every question you've been asking. Colonel Harrington stepped forward, his command voice cutting through the chaos. Everyone quiet, now! The Marines fell silent immediately. He turned to Jordan, his expression difficult to read. Blake, I'm going to need an explanation, a full explanation. Jordan straightened to her full height. The hunched shoulders disappeared. The uncertain posture evaporated. She stood the way she'd been trained to stand for 12 years, spine straight, shoulders, back, feet, planted with perfect balance. The transformation was striking. She looked taller, more solid, unmistakably military despite the civilian clothes. Jordan Blake, Gunnery Sergeant, E7 United States Marine Corps, retired. Her voice had changed too, no longer soft and deferential. This was the voice that had commanded training platoons that had led Marines through combat scenarios. Serial number? She rattled off the 9-digit number without hesitation. Master Gunny Stone stepped closer to Harrington, speaking clearly enough for nearby Marines to hear. Sir, I served with Gunnery Sergeant Blake. Helmand Province, 2019. She was Senior MCMAP Instructor for 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines. She personally trained over 200 Marines in close quarters combat techniques. He pulled out his phone, opening a photo with practiced efficiency. Sir, this is our battalion photo from that deployment. He held the screen toward Harrington. The image showed a full Marine battalion in combat gear standing in formation against the Afghan mountains. Stone's finger indicated a figure 3 rows back, a smaller Marine female wearing sergeant stripes and full combat kit. The face was harder in that photo, leaner, marked by the stress of deployment. But it was unmistakably Jordan Blake. Connor Hayes suddenly snapped to full attention, his body rigid. Sir Gunnery Sergeant Blake ran our CQB course at Quantico in 2020. She's the reason half my platoon made it through urban warfare training alive. His voice carried a mixture of awe and shame. She taught us the exact techniques that saved my life during my deployment. I watched her demonstrate fatal funnel avoidance at least a dozen times. How did I not recognize her? Harrington pulled out his tablet, accessing the Marine Corps database through his secure login. He entered Jordan's information, the screen loading for several seconds that felt like hours. When the record appeared, he turned the tablet so nearby Marines could see. The official record displayed across the screen, Blake Jordan E. Rank, E7 Gunnery. Sergeant Mose, 0916. Martial Arts Instructor, Basha Combat Instructor. Trainer service dates 2009, 2021. Deployments 3, Iraq, 2010, Iraq, 2013, Afghanistan, 2019. Decorations. Navy Achievement, Medal with Combat. Marine Corps, Good Conduct, Medal 4th. Award, Global War on Terrorism Service. Medal Afghanistan, Campaign. Medal Iraq, Campaign. Medal Status, Honorable Discharge. Medical. 2021. Specializations, MCMAP, Black Belt. Instructor, Close Quarters, Battle, Tactical Combat, Casualty Care, Weapons, Safety Protocols, Training, Curriculum Development. The silence that followed was absolute. Jordan's voice cut through it, quiet but carrying. "I wasn't hiding, Colonel. I was observing." She met his eyes steadily. "Last year you requested a comprehensive safety assessment after Corporal Davies died in a training accident. Command reviewed applications for qualified assessors and my name came up. I volunteered to conduct it." Harrington's face shifted through several emotions. "You volunteered. Why?" "Because I needed the assessment to be unbiased." Jordan's hands clenched at her sides. "You needed to see how your facility actually operates, not how it operates when everyone knows they're being evaluated. So, we created a cover story. Administrative specialist, civilian contractor, someone who'd be ignored, dismissed, underestimated. Someone who could observe the real safety culture of this base without affecting it. Harrington's tone sharpened. "Myself and the Inspector General's office, sir. This was an official investigation, just unconventional in its execution." Vance found his voice, though it came out strangled. You've been investigating us for 3 weeks. Documenting, Sergeant, every safety violation, every shortcut, every time ego overrode protocol." Jordan's gaze swept across the assembled Marines. "That rifle that just failed. That was the 3rd weapon I flagged in my reports. Private Derrick is alive because I was positioned close enough to respond immediately when my warnings were ignored. Corporal Davies wasn't that lucky." She turned back to Harrington. "Last November, training exercise with live ammunition. Instructor pushed the timeline, skipped safety checks, and a weapon malfunction killed a 23-year-old Marine. The investigation found mechanical failure, but the real failure was cultural." The words landed like physical blows. Several Marines looked at the ground. They'd all known Davies. They'd all attended his memorial service. And they'd all known in the way that military personnel always know that the official investigation hadn't captured the full truth. Jordan continued, her voice steady, but carrying weight. "I've been documenting systematically, 87 pages so far, 23 critical safety violations, 14 personnel issues involving abuse of authority or negligence, 6 pieces of equipment with maintenance deficiencies that will cause injuries or deaths if not addressed. This facility's safety culture is broken, and it starts with leadership that values performance metrics over Marine welfare." Her eyes found Vance. "You grabbed me. You attempted to physically remove me from a medical emergency so you could control the narrative about your negligence. In doing so, you exposed my identity. But you know what, I'm grateful, because now I don't have to stay silent while I watch another Marine get hurt." The shift in power dynamics was complete and undeniable. Minutes ago, Jordan had been the lowest person in the hierarchy, subject to mockery and dismissal. Now, she stood as what she truly was, a combat veteran with 12 years of experience, a senior NCO. Someone whose rank technically exceeded everyone present except Harrington and Stone. Private Moore stepped forward hesitantly. "Gunnery Sergeant, I owe you an apology. You saved me with that malfunction clear, and I didn't even acknowledge you. I assumed you were..." He couldn't finish the sentence. Jordan's expression softened slightly. "You learned from it, Devil Dog. You didn't freeze next time you had a malfunction. You executed the procedure correctly. That's what matters." The casual use of the traditional Marine nickname Devil Dog carried its own weight of belonging. Harrington's command voice returned. "All personnel listen up. As of this moment, all training exercises are suspended, pending a comprehensive safety review. Staff Sergeant Vance, Lieutenant Brennan, you are both relieved of training duties effective immediately. Report to my office at 1700 hours." He looked at the MPs who'd arrived with the medical team. "Escort them off this range." Vance's face had gone from pale to flushed. "Sir, with respect, I've served this command for 8 years. And in that time, how many near misses did you ignore? How many warnings did you dismiss?" Harrington's voice was ice. "A Marine is in the hospital right now because you overrode a qualified safety assessment. You're lucky I'm only relieving you of duties. The formal investigation may result in much more serious consequences." As the MPs moved to escort Vance away, Jordan felt an unexpected sensation. Not triumph, not vindication. Just a deep bone-weary exhaustion mixed with relief. The mission was blown, but Derrick Hayes was alive. The safety violations were exposed. Maybe that was enough. Corporal Tucker approached slowly, his earlier arrogance completely gone. He removed his rank insignia, the 2 chevrons indicating his corporal status, and held them out to Jordan. "Ma'am, I tried to block you from safety meetings. I deliberately excluded you because I thought you didn't belong. I was wrong. I don't deserve these." Jordan looked at the insignia, then at Tucker's face. The shame there was genuine. She gently pushed his hand back. "You'll earn them properly now, Corporal. That's how we fix this, not by punishing everyone, but by learning, by being better." Over the next hour, as the chaos slowly organized itself into controlled procedures, the story spread across the base like wildfire. Off-duty Marines emerged from barracks, from the mess hall, from admin buildings. By 1800 hours, it seemed like every person on base knew that the quiet clerk they had ignored or mocked for 3 weeks was actually a decorated combat veteran conducting an undercover investigation. The situation demanded a comprehensive response. Crisis management extends far beyond immediate reactions. It requires strategic planning, financial preparation, and institutional protection. Modern insurance platforms now recognize this reality, offering specialized coverage that accounts for organizational risk in high-stakes environments. These policies go beyond standard liability, providing protection for leadership decisions made under pressure, covering legal expenses when internal investigations lead to external scrutiny, and ensuring that institutional accountability doesn't destroy individual careers. For military facilities, law enforcement agencies, and organizations where split-second decisions carry life or death consequences, specialized insurance isn't optional, it's essential. These comprehensive policies protect not just against physical injuries, but against the complex legal and financial fallout that occurs when safety cultures fail and investigations reveal systemic issues. Madison Pierce found Jordan 2 days later in the admin building. Jordan had moved into a proper office now, her cover blown completely. Maddie knocked hesitantly on the doorframe. Her eyes were red, her usual confidence completely absent. "Gunnery Sergeant Blake, I don't know how to say this." Her voice broke. "I led the mockery. I made it a game to see how much we could demean you. I called you things that I can't even repeat now without feeling sick. I have no excuse. Nothing I say will make it better." Jordan set down her pen, studying the young woman. "Why did you do it?" Pierce. Maddie struggled with the answer. "Because you seemed weak, because it was easy, because everyone else was doing it." She shook her head. "Those are all true, but they're not the real reason. The real reason is that I was scared." "Scared of what?" "Of being at the bottom, of being the target." Maddie's hands twisted together. "I'm a woman in a male-dominated environment. I thought if I could make someone else the target, if I could lead the mockery instead of being mocked, I'd be safe. I threw you under the bus to protect myself. And you are everything I should aspire to be, a real Marine leader, and I treated you like garbage." The honesty was raw, painful. Jordan let the silence sit for a moment before responding. "You saw what you expected to see, Pierce. That was partly by design. I needed people to underestimate me. But here's what you need to learn. Real strength doesn't come from making others feel small. It comes from lifting others up. You want to be safe in this environment. Earn respect through competence, not through cruelty. Can you do that?" Maddie nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, ma'am. I'll try. I'll really try." "Then start by posting an apology. Not to me, I don't need it, but to every junior Marine who watched you lead that mockery and learned that bullying is acceptable. Show them what real accountability looks like." 3 days later, Maddie posted a video that went viral across military social media. In it, she sat in her barracks room, no makeup, no performance. Just honesty. "I judge someone by their appearance and job title. I led a campaign of mockery against a person who turned out to be a decorated combat veteran, but that's not even the point. Even if she had been just a civilian clerk, my behavior was wrong. I learned the most valuable lesson of my career from someone I tried to demean, that real leadership means protecting the people around you, not elevating yourself by tearing others down. If you've ever participated in this kind of toxic behavior, I'm asking you to stop. Be better than I was." The video hit 2 million views in 48 hours. Comments poured in from Marines across the world, many sharing their own experiences with toxic leadership and their own journeys toward accountability. Connor Hayes approached Jordan with a formal request. They met in one of the empty briefing rooms, Hayes standing at parade rest until Jordan told him to relax. Gunnery Sergeant, my team deploys to Syria in 8 months. We'll be embedded with partner forces operating in austere conditions with limited backup. I need someone who'll call out my mistakes before they kill my Marines. Would you consider serving as advisor during our pre-deployment training? Jordan considered the request carefully. Your brother just got out of the hospital yesterday. 16 stitches, no permanent damage. Are you sure you want advice from someone whose presence led to that injury? Hayes shook his head firmly. Ma'am, my brother is alive because you were there. The weapon would have failed regardless. If you hadn't been close enough to respond, if you hadn't had the training to treat him immediately, the corpsman said Derek would have gone into shock before he could reach him. Blood loss alone could have been critical. You didn't cause the injury. You prevented it from being worse. That's exactly the kind of leadership I need from my team. Jordan agreed. Over the following weeks, she worked with Hayes' platoon, identifying gaps in their training, correcting techniques that could get them killed, pushing them harder than they'd ever been pushed. But the respect was mutual now. They didn't fear her, they trusted her. And that made all the difference. The formal ceremony took place 3 weeks after the revelation. Colonel Harrington stood before the assembled base personnel, Jordan beside him, in a proper uniform, now her own uniform retrieved from storage with her gunnery sergeant stripes displayed proudly. Effective immediately, this facility will implement the Blake Protocol, Harrington announced. A comprehensive safety system designed by Gunnery Sergeant Blake, incorporating lessons learned from 12 years of active service, 3 combat deployments, and extensive analysis of training accidents across the Marine Corps. The protocol includes mandatory pre-exercise safety reviews, independent verification of equipment status, anonymous reporting systems for safety concerns, and regular audits by personnel outside the direct chain of command. He turned to face Jordan directly. Gunnery Sergeant Blake came to this facility under difficult circumstances. She endured treatment that no Marine should have to endure. She did so in order to provide this command with the unvarnished truth about our safety culture. Her report documented 87 distinct issues, most of which we had failed to identify through standard oversight. Because of her work, changes are being implemented that will save lives not just here, but across the Marine Corps, as her protocols are adopted fleet-wide. The assembled Marines stood in complete silence, the weight of the moment settling over them. Additionally, Harrington continued, all instructors at this facility will now complete mandatory trainings in humility bias, awareness, and ethical leadership before certification. Because rank is earned through respect and competence, not through fear or abuse of authority. This is a direct quote from Gunnery Sergeant Blake's report, and it will become the foundation of our training philosophy going forward. That evening, Private Derek Hayes, face still bandaged but healing well, sought out Jordan. His older brother Connor stood with him for moral support. Derek came to attention, his salute crisp, despite the visible discomfort from his injuries. Gunnery Sergeant, you saved my life. While everyone was treating you like you didn't matter, you were the only one who cared enough to document the problems that almost killed me. I don't know how to thank you for that. Jordan returned his salute, then dropped it. You thank me by learning from this Hayes, by being the kind of leader who listens to warnings, who doesn't let ego override safety, who protects the Marines under your command. Can you do that? Yes, ma'am, I swear it. Dr. Nina Cross pulled Jordan aside later that week for a private conversation in her office. Your PTSD symptoms, Cross said carefully, reviewing her notes. When we started this assignment, you were experiencing flashbacks twice a week. Anxiety attacks, hypervigilance that was affecting your sleep. Over the past 3 weeks, your symptoms have actually improved. Why do you think that is? Jordan considered the question seriously. Carrying the lie was heavier than carrying the truth. Every time someone mocked me, every time I had to pretend to be less than I was, it felt like I was betraying myself. Betraying Davies and every Marine who died because people wouldn't listen to safety warnings. When the truth came out, when I could finally stand up straight and be who I actually am. It was like setting down a weight I didn't realize was crushing me. Cross nodded slowly. Authenticity is therapeutic. You spent 3 weeks in a controlled environment where you couldn't be yourself, and it was taking a psychological toll. Now that you're operating as your true self again, your nervous system is calming down. She made a note in her file. How do you feel about the offer they made you? Captain Morrison had officially offered Jordan a permanent position, lead instructor in safety oversight, with full recognition of her gunnery sergeant rank, and a contract that would give her authority to implement systemic changes. It was everything the mission was supposed to accomplish and more. I told them I needed time to think, Jordan admitted. This place almost broke me. I'm not sure I want to stay. But, Cross prompted, but I keep thinking about the next Corporal Davies, the next kid who dies because safety culture is broken and no one's willing to fix it. If I leave, will the changes stick, or will they slide back into old patterns once I'm gone? Cross didn't answer. Some questions didn't have easy solutions. Sergeant Marcus Williams approached Jordan with an unusual request. His 19-year-old daughter was entering Marine Corps officer candidate school in 3 months. Ma'am, she needs to see what a real Marine leader looks like. She needs a mentor who can show her that leadership isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about being the most competent. Would you be willing to speak with her? Jordan agreed. The conversation with Williams's daughter lasted 2 hours, covering everything from tactical decision-making to navigating male-dominated environments to the psychological toll of command responsibility. At the end, the young woman looked at Jordan with something approaching awe. "How do you deal with it?" she asked. "Knowing that your decisions might get people killed, that's terrifying." Jordan's answer was honest. "It is terrifying, every time. But you make the best decision you can with the information you have, you prepare as thoroughly as possible, and then you trust your training. And when things go wrong, because they will, you take responsibility, you learn from it, and you make sure it doesn't happen again. That's all you can do." Command released an official statement about Jordan's assessment, carefully worded, to acknowledge the investigation without creating public relations nightmares. Media coverage followed, mostly positive. Veterans organizations reached out. Marines from Jordan's past deployments sent messages of support and respect. The story resonated because it touched something fundamental, the idea that real strength often looks different from what we expect, that judgment based on appearance betrays our own limitations, that competence speaks louder than bravado. 2 weeks after the revelation, the facility-wide culture shift was undeniable. Instructors questioned each other's methods constructively rather than defensively. Trainees reported safety concerns without fear of retaliation. Ego-driven leadership was being systematically replaced by competence-based respect. The change wasn't complete. Culture shifts never are, but the foundation had been laid. Jordan stood in her office late one Friday evening, packing her belongings into a box. She had accepted the hybrid role: 3 days training, 2 days safety oversight, full authority to implement systemic changes. It felt right, despite the psychological toll the initial mission had taken. A knock on her door made her look up. Private Jackson Moore stood there holding something wrapped in protective paper. Behind him were a dozen other Marines, including Connor Hayes, Lisa Chen, and even Madison Pierce. "Gunnery Sergeant, the platoon wanted to give you something." Moore stepped forward, unwrapping the package carefully. Inside was a shadow box, a military display case containing Jordan's combat medals, her original Gunnery Sergeant stripes photos from her deployments, and a brass plate engraved with a simple phrase: "Real leaders don't seek recognition. They seek results." Jordan felt her throat tighten. These were awards she'd kept in storage, deliberately hidden during her time under cover. "How did you—" "We did some research, ma'am," Connor said quietly. "Found your award citations, found photos from your deployments, found testimony from Marines whose lives you saved or whose training kept them alive in combat. We wanted you to know that we see you now, really see you, and we're grateful." Jordan took the shadow box, her hands shaking slightly. "I'll display this publicly," she said softly. "Not because I need recognition, but because maybe someone else needs to see that the quiet ones, the overlooked ones, might be exactly who we need to listen to." "Verb semper fi gunny," Moore said with feeling. "Semper fidelis." Jordan returned the ancient Marine motto, always faithful. The group dispersed slowly, leaving Jordan alone with the shadow box. She placed it on her desk, where everyone could see it. For the first time since her medical retirement, she felt at peace with her identity. But that peace lasted only until her phone rang. The number showed a 703 area code, Virginia Pentagon region. Jordan stared at it for several seconds before answering. "Blake." The voice on the other end was male professional, carrying the unmistakable tone of senior officer. "Gunnery Sergeant Blake, this is Colonel Bradley Vance, Marine Corps Training and Education Command, Quantico. Your assessment report has reached some very high desks." Jordan sank into her chair. "Sir?" We have a situation at Camp Pendleton, California. Similar patterns to what you uncovered at Mountain Warfare Training Center, but potentially larger scale. The brass wants an independent evaluation before congressional oversight gets involved. Problem is, we need someone who can operate under cover, someone who won't tip off the command structure that they're being investigated. Vance paused. You've proven you can do that effectively. Jordan watched through her window as Marines conducted evening drills. She saw Connor Hayes correcting a trainee's stance with patience, not anger. Saw Madison Pierce helping a struggling peer instead of mocking them. Saw the culture change she'd fought to create. Sir, are you asking me to go undercover again? Not asking Gunny, the commandant is requesting, personally. Vance's tone shifted, becoming more grave. But I need to be honest with you about the stakes. This isn't just about safety protocols. The preliminary reports from Pendleton suggest something more serious. Training fatalities that were ruled accidental, but the circumstances don't add up. Equipment failures that show patterns of tampering rather than maintenance neglect. We think someone might be actively covering up incidents. Jordan's fingers tightened on the phone. Someone in the chain of command? We don't know yet. That's what we need you to find out. But Blake, if there is active misconduct happening, if someone is deliberately putting Marines at risk and covering it up, you'll be walking into a potentially hostile situation. The people responsible won't want to be exposed. How long would I have? 60 days to assess, document, and report without blowing your cover. You'll be inserted as a GS-7 civilian logistics coordinator. No one will know you're former E-7 except me and the commandant. You'll have emergency contact protocols, but you'll be largely isolated. Jordan stood looking at the shadow box on her desk, at the medals that represented 12 years of service, at the photos of Marines she'd trained, some of whom had used those lessons to survive combat. She thought about Corporal Davies, who died because people ignored warnings, about Derek Hayes, who'd almost died for the same reason. Jordan stood in her office 3 weeks after the revelation, packing belongings into a standard-issue cardboard box. The space looked different now, no longer the cramped corner where she'd hidden herself, but a proper office befitting her actual rank and position. The shadow box containing her combat medals sat prominently on the desk where everyone could see it. A brass nameplate read, Gunnery Sergeant Jordan E. Blake, USMC Ret. Lead Safety Instructor. She'd accepted Colonel Harrington's offer. 3 days per week as lead combat instructor, 2 days conducting comprehensive safety oversight, with full authority to halt any training operation she deemed unsafe. The contract gave her more power than most active duty personnel, a civilian position, with military authority, the kind of hybrid role that Pentagon bureaucrats usually spent months debating before approving. But Harrington had pushed it through in 72 hours. The 87-page report Jordan had compiled was already being circulated at Headquarters Marine Corps. Senior leadership was asking uncomfortable questions about how such systematic safety failures had gone undetected for so long. Harrington needed to demonstrate immediate corrective action, and Jordan's permanent assignment served that purpose perfectly. The facility had changed in those 3 weeks, subtly at first, then with gathering momentum. Instructors questioned each other's methods now, not defensively, but constructively, genuinely seeking to improve. Trainees reported safety concerns through the new anonymous system Jordan had implemented, and every single report was investigated within 24 hours. The toxic hierarchy that had valued ego over competence was being systematically dismantled and rebuilt on a foundation of mutual respect. Staff Sergeant Drake Vance had been reduced in rank to sergeant and transferred to administrative duties at a supply depot in 29 Palms, about as far from training operations as the Marine Corps could send him without actually forcing retirement. His career as an instructor was over. Lieutenant Tyler Brennan had accepted intensive leadership remediation under Jordan's direct oversight, spending 4 hours every day learning what ethical leadership actually looked like. The transformation had been painful for him, ego-shattering, but potentially redemptive. Corporal Ryan Tucker had become one of Jordan's most dedicated students, his earlier arrogance replaced by genuine humility. He'd requested additional mentorship sessions, asking Jordan to review his leadership techniques and call out his mistakes before they harmed anyone. The change wasn't complete, real transformation never happened overnight, but the foundation was being laid. Madison Pierce had posted her viral apology video, and the response had surprised everyone. Instead of the mockery and condemnation Maddie had expected, she'd received overwhelming support from veterans and active duty personnel, sharing their own stories of toxic leadership and personal growth. The video had opened conversations across social media about military culture, about the cost of unchecked ego, about the importance of accountability. Maddie had become unexpectedly a voice for cultural change in military communities. She had approached Jordan last week asking to be mentored formally, wanting to learn how to lead with competence instead of cruelty. Connor Hayes had requested Jordan as advisor for his platoon's pre-deployment training to Syria. They'd spent the past 2 weeks conducting intensive exercises, and Jordan had been ruthlessly honest in her assessments. She'd identified gaps in their urban warfare tactics, weaknesses in their communication protocols, dangerous assumptions in their planning process. Hayes had absorbed every criticism implemented, every correction, and watched his team's performance improve dramatically. His younger brother Derek, recovered now, with only a thin scar across his cheekbone to show for his injury, had asked Jordan to write him a letter of recommendation for officer candidate school. She'd agreed, moved by the young Marine's determination to turn his near-death experience into motivation for excellence. The culture shift was real, visible, undeniable. Sergeant Paul Griffin had mentioned during breakfast service 2 days ago that morale metrics were up 40% since Jordan's revelation. Marines actually wanted to come to training, now actually trusted their instructors to prioritize their safety over performance statistics. The mess hall atmosphere had changed from competitive hostility to professional camaraderie. Master Gunnery Sergeant Victor Stone had become Jordan's closest ally on base. The grizzled NCO had apologized formally for not recognizing her sooner, for not acting more decisively on his suspicions. Jordan had brushed off the apology. Stone had done exactly what good NCOs should do, gathering information, before acting, protecting operational security, even when uncertain. They had developed a professional friendship based on mutual respect, often meeting for coffee to discuss training philosophy and leadership challenges. Stone had 40 years of combined experience. Jordan had 12 years of intense modern combat instruction. Together, they were developing training protocols that would eventually be adopted across multiple Marine Corps installations. Dr. Nina Cross had continued monitoring Jordan's psychological state through regular check-ins disguised as casual conversations. The PTSD symptoms that had plagued Jordan for 2 years since her medical retirement had diminished significantly. The nightmares came less frequently now. The hypervigilance had eased into normal situational awareness instead of consuming paranoia. Cross's theory that carrying the lie of her cover identity had been more psychologically damaging than the combat trauma itself seemed to be proving accurate. Authenticity was therapeutic. Being able to stand tall, to use her real name, to exercise her actual expertise without hiding, had allowed Jordan to begin genuine healing. A knock on her doorframe pulled Jordan from her thoughts. Private Jackson Moore stood there, shifting his weight nervously, holding a carefully wrapped package. Behind him stood a dozen other Marines: Connor Hayes, Lisa Chen, Madison, Pierce, Derek Hayes. With his healing scar, even Corporal Tucker. They looked uncertain, almost shy, a stark contrast to their earlier hostility. Gunnery Sergeant Moore's voice cracked slightly with emotion. The platoon wanted to give you something before things change again. Jordan set down the file folder she'd been packing. Come in, all of you. They filed into the office, filling the small space. Moore stepped forward, carefully unwrapping the package. Inside was a shadow box, a military display case with a glass front professionally constructed. It contained Jordan's combat medals, arranged in proper order of precedence: the Navy Achievement Medal with its distinctive Combat 5 device, indicating valor under fire, the Marine Corps. Good Conduct Medal, showing her 4 consecutive awards, campaign medals from Iraq and Afghanistan. Her original gunnery sergeant stripes were mounted on red felt backing. Photographs from her deployments showed her in full combat gear, surrounded by Marines she'd trained, some of whose faces Jordan recognized even years later. The centerpiece was a brass plate engraved with a simple phrase: "Real leaders don't seek recognition, they seek results." Jordan felt her throat tighten, emotion threatening to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. How did you all... She couldn't finish the question. We did research, ma'am, Connor Hayes spoke quietly. Found your awards citations in the Marine Corps database. Found photos from your deployments in unit archives. Found testimony from Marines whose lives you saved, whose training kept them alive in combat situations. We reached out to some of them. They had a lot to say about you, about how your instruction made the difference between coming home and not coming home. Hayes pulled out his phone, opened his email, and began reading from messages he'd received. Gunnery Sergeant Blake's CQB training saved my life in Ramadi. Her voice in my head telling me to clear the fatal funnel was the only thing that kept me from walking into an ambush. He scrolled to another message. She was the toughest instructor I ever had, but fair. Never asked us to do anything she couldn't do better herself. When things went wrong in Helmand, I survived because of techniques she'd drilled into us until they became instinct. Connor looked up from his phone, meeting Jordan's eyes. There were dozens of messages like that, ma'am. Marines you trained 5, 6, 7 years ago who are alive today because you taught them properly. We wanted you to know that we see you now. Really see you. Not the admin clerk we dismissed. Not the paperwork princess we mocked. We see the Marine who saved hundreds of lives through excellence in training, and we're grateful. More than words can express. Jordan took the shadow box with shaking hands, her professional composure finally cracking. A single tear tracked down her cheek before she could stop it. I'll display this publicly. She managed her voice thick with emotion. Not because I need recognition, but because maybe someone else needs to see it. Maybe some other Marine who's being dismissed or overlooked needs to know that the quiet ones, the ones who don't brag or posture, might be exactly who we need to listen to. Semper Fi Gunny, Moore said with absolute sincerity. Semper Fidelis. Jordan returned the ancient motto. Always faithful, always loyal, the words that bound all Marines together regardless of rank or time or distance. The group dispersed slowly, each Marine pausing to shake her hand or nod respect before leaving. Jordan was left alone with the shadow box, which she placed carefully on her desk beside her nameplate. For the first time since her medical retirement 2 years ago, she felt at peace with her identity. She was a Marine, had been, would always be. The uniform might change, the duty status might shift, but the core identity remained unchanged. She sat down at her desk and opened her laptop, intending to finish some administrative work before the end of the day. But her phone rang an unknown number with a 703 area code, Virginia, Pentagon region, Washington, D.C. metro area. Jordan stared at the screen for 3 full rings, instinct telling her this call would change everything. She could let it go to voicemail, could pretend she hadn't seen it, could maintain this new comfortable equilibrium she'd achieved at Mountain Warfare Training Center, but she'd never been someone who avoided difficult calls. She answered. Blake. The voice on the other end was male professional, carrying the unmistakable tone of senior officer accustomed to immediate obedience. Gunnery Sergeant Jordan Blake, this is Colonel Bradley Vance, Marine Corps, Training and Education Command, Quantico. Your assessment report from Mountain Warfare Training Center has reached some very high desks. I'm calling because the Commandant himself has read your work and has a question for you. Jordan's pulse accelerated despite her controlled breathing. The Commandant, the highest-ranking officer in the entire Marine Corps, a 4-star general who reported directly to the Secretary of Defense. If her report had reached his desk, the implications were enormous. I'm listening, sir. We have a situation at Camp Pendleton in California, similar patterns to what you uncovered at Mountain Warfare Training Center, but potentially larger scale and more serious in nature. The brass wants an independent evaluation before congressional oversight gets involved, before media attention forces our hand, before we lose control of the narrative. Problem is, we need someone who can operate under cover, someone who won't tip off the command structure that they're being investigated, someone who can observe the real culture without their presence changing behavior patterns. Jordan's hand tightened on the phone. She knew exactly what he was about to ask. Sir, are you requesting me to conduct another undercover assessment? Not requesting, Gunny. The Commandant is personally asking. He was impressed by your work at Mountain Warfare Training Center, the depth of your analysis, the systematic documentation, the courage it took to endure what you endured without breaking cover. He believes you're uniquely qualified for this type of operation. Jordan stood pacing to the window that overlooked the training ranges, Marines were conducting exercises below, moving with a kind of careful precision that came from proper safety culture. Her work here had made a difference, real, measurable difference. Sir, with respect, I just spent 3 weeks being mocked, dismissed, and treated like incompetent dead weight. The psychological toll of maintaining deep cover while being constantly disrespected, Dr. Cross has documented the impact. I'm not sure I'm prepared to go through that again so soon. I understand completely, and I wouldn't ask if this wasn't critical. Vance's tone shifted, becoming more grave. But, Gunnery Sergeant Blake, I need to be completely honest with you about the stakes. This isn't just about safety protocols or corner cutting or toxic leadership. The preliminary reports from Camp Pendleton suggest something far more serious. Training fatalities that were ruled accidental, but the circumstances don't add up when you examine them closely. Equipment failures that show patterns of tampering rather than maintenance neglect. Documentation that's been altered or destroyed. Financial irregularities in maintenance contracts. Jordan felt ice spread through her chest. Sir, are you suggesting deliberate misconduct? Someone intentionally harming Marines? We don't know yet. That's what we need you to find out. But if our suspicions are correct, if someone at Pendleton is actively causing training accidents, whether to cover up incompetence or for financial gain, or for reasons we haven't even considered, then Marines are in immediate danger. Every day we delay, the investigation is another day someone could die. Jordan closed her eyes, thinking of Corporal Davies, the young Marine who died at Mountain Warfare Training Center because people ignored safety warnings. She thought of Derek Hayes, who'd nearly died for the same reason. She thought of all the Marines who trusted their leadership to protect them, who believed their training environments were safe, who never questioned whether the people in charge actually had their best interests at heart. How long would I have? 60 days to assess, document, and report without blowing your cover. You'll be inserted as a GS-7 Civilian Logistics Coordinator. Different cover story than last time, but similar concept. No one will know you're former E7 except me and the Commandant. You'll have emergency contact protocols, direct line to my office and to the Inspector General, but you'll be largely isolated in terms of support structure. What about the people at Pendleton? The command structure. I'll be investigating. Camp Pendleton is the largest Marine Corps base on the West Coast. 18,000 Marines. Over 200 buildings spread across 85,000 acres. If there is a conspiracy, and we're not certain there is, but the evidence suggests it, then it could involve dozens of people at multiple levels of the command structure. We don't know who's clean and who's compromised. You'll need to trust no one until you're absolutely certain of their loyalty. Jordan opened her eyes, looking down at the shadow box on her desk. At the medals representing 12 years of service. At the photos of Marines she'd trained, some of whom had survived combat because of her instruction. At the brass plate, real leaders don't seek recognition. They seek results. She thought about Master Gunny Stone, who'd spent 30 years protecting Marines through quiet competence. About Sergeant Griffin, who'd recognized her true identity through careful observation, but had held his silence to protect her mission. About Dr. Cross, who'd monitored her psychological state while maintaining professional confidentiality. About Connor Hayes, who'd lost his arrogance and learned to listen. About Madison Pierce, who'd transformed cruelty into accountability. About Private Moore, who'd learned that respect was earned through competence, not demanded through hierarchy. All of them had changed because one person had been willing to endure mockery and dismissal to document truth. Had been willing to sacrifice personal dignity for mission success. Had been willing to stand in the hot zone, literally and figuratively, to protect Marines who didn't even know they needed protecting. And somewhere at Camp Pendleton, Marines were training under leadership that might be actively trying to harm them, were trusting people who might be betraying that trust in the worst possible way, were walking into dangers they couldn't see because someone was deliberately hiding the truth. Sir, I have conditions. Name them. If I find evidence of deliberate harm, not negligence, but intentional actions that endanger Marines, I want full authority to act immediately. No waiting for chain of command approval, no bureaucratic delays, no risk that evidence will be destroyed while we follow proper procedures. If Marines are in danger, I stop it. Right then, even if it blows my cover. A pause on the other end of the line. Jordan could almost hear Vance weighing the implications, calculating the risks. Authorized. You'll have emergency contact protocols that connect directly to my office and to the Inspector General. If you call that number, we mobilize within 60 minutes. Military Police Criminal Investigation Division, full investigative teams. But Gunnery Sergeant Blake, use it carefully. If you blow your cover prematurely, if the people responsible realize they're being investigated, they'll destroy evidence and will never be able to prove what happened. They'll walk away clean while Marines continue dying. Understood, sir. Second condition, I want complete access to all previous investigation reports, accident reviews, equipment failure analyses, and personnel files for the past 3 years at Pendleton. Everything? If there's a pattern to find, I need historical data to identify it. You'll have full database access through secure channels. We'll set you up with encrypted communication protocols and a cover story for why you're accessing those files, something about logistics analysis or supply chain optimization. Third condition. Dr. Nina Cross continues as my psychological oversight. She already knows my background, understands the toll this work takes, and has established protocols for monitoring my mental health during deep cover operations. I won't do this without proper psychological support. Done. Dr. Cross will be briefed and given secure communication access. Anything else? Jordan looked out the window again, watching Marines train under the safety protocols she'd fought to implement. When this is over, when the investigation concludes and the truth comes out, I want protection for whistleblowers who come forward. Anyone at Pendleton who's been afraid to report problems because of retaliation, who has information but hasn't felt safe. Sharing it needs to know they'll be protected if they cooperate with the investigation. We can't fix the culture if people are afraid to tell the truth. Agreed. The Inspector General's office will establish witness protection protocols and immunity agreements for anyone providing information about criminal misconduct. The Commandant has already approved that approach. He wants the truth, regardless of how many senior officers it implicates. Jordan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision settling onto her shoulders. 3 more weeks of being dismissed, mocked, treated as incompetent. 3 more weeks of watching her words, controlling her reactions, hiding her expertise. 3 more weeks of psychological pressure that would test every limit of her resilience. But if it saved lives, if it prevented even one more Corporal Davies from dying because leadership failed, then it was worth the cost. When do I start? Your flight to San Diego leaves Thursday morning, 0630 hours from Ontario International. That gives you 3 days to wrap up your obligations at Mountain Warfare Training Center and prepare for the mission. You'll receive a secure data packet Wednesday evening with your cover identity background documentation and initial intelligence assessments. Study it thoroughly. Your cover needs to be bulletproof this time because the stakes are exponentially higher. Sir, one final question. The preliminary reports you mentioned, the training fatalities that don't add up. Do you have a hypothesis about motive? If someone is deliberately causing accidents, why would they do it? Vance hesitated, and Jordan could hear papers rustling in the background. We have theories. Could be covering up massive incompetence if someone's been falsifying training records or equipment inspections for years. They might be eliminating witnesses or destroying evidence. Could be financial maintenance contracts are worth millions. And if someone's been paid for work they didn't perform, they might be willing to kill to hide the fraud. Could be personal grudges, vendettas, interpersonal conflicts that escalated beyond rational limits. Or, and this is the hypothesis that keeps me awake at night, could be ideological. Someone who thinks the Marine Corps has gone soft, who's intentionally creating dangerous training environments to weed out the weak through a twisted interpretation of military selection. Jordan felt her blood run cold. That would require someone with significant authority. Someone who could manipulate training schedules, alter safety protocols, influence accident investigations. Exactly, which is why we need someone on the inside who can observe without being detected. Someone who can identify patterns that official investigations have missed. Someone who has the tactical expertise to recognize what's genuinely accidental versus what's been engineered to look accidental. Someone expendable, Jordan said quietly. Someone brave, Vance corrected. The Commandant doesn't ask Marines to take risks he wouldn't take himself, but he also knows that some missions require people with very specific skills, and right now, you're the only person we've identified with the combination of tactical expertise, instructional experience, psychological resilience, and proven ability to maintain deep cover under extreme stress. If you decline this mission, Gunnery Sergeant Blake, no one will question your decision. You've already done more than enough. Jordan thought about the shadow box, about the Marines who'd written messages saying her training had saved their lives, about the responsibility that came with expertise, the obligation to use your skills when others needed them, even when it cost you personally, especially when it cost you personally. She looked at her reflection in the window glass, saw herself in civilian clothes, no longer hiding, no longer pretending, saw the Marine underneath who'd never really left, who'd just been waiting for the next mission that mattered, saw someone who'd survived combat, survived injury, survived PTSD, survived 3 weeks of deliberate psychological warfare, someone who was still standing, still capable, still willing to fight for Marines who couldn't fight for themselves. "I'll be ready, sir. I know you will be gunny. That's why the Commandant chose you. You've already proven you can handle psychological pressure that would break most people. You've proven you can maintain operational security, even when everything in you wants to fight back. And you've proven that you put mission success and Marine welfare above personal comfort or recognition. Those are exactly the qualities we need." After the call ended, Jordan stood in silence for several long minutes, watching the sun descend toward the California mountains. The training ranges below were winding down for the day, Marines securing equipment, conducting after-action reviews, heading toward the mess hall for evening meal. Everything looked peaceful, professional, safe, because she'd fought to make it that way, because she'd endured mockery and dismissal to document truth, because she'd chosen mission over ego. And somewhere at Camp Pendleton, Marines were finishing their training day without knowing they might be walking into deliberately created death traps. We're trusting leadership that might be actively betraying them. We're living in a false sense of security while someone, maybe multiple someones, work to harm them. Jordan couldn't let that continue. Wouldn't let that continue. Even if it meant going undercover again. Even if it meant enduring another 3 weeks of being treated as incompetent. Even if it meant risking her psychological recovery and her hard-won peace. Some missions weren't optional. Some fights had to be fought regardless of the personal cost. She opened her laptop and began researching Camp Pendleton, training accident reports, equipment failure analyses, personnel rosters, facility layouts. She worked through the night building the foundation of knowledge she'd need to survive the next mission. Coffee kept her alert. Purpose kept her focused. The faces of Marines who died in training accidents kept her motivated. At 300 hours exhausted but nowhere near finished, Jordan finally stood and stretched. Her body ached from hours sitting in one position. Her eyes burned from staring at the computer screen. But her mind was sharp, filing away details, identifying patterns, preparing for what came next. She walked to the window one last time, looking out over the darkened training facility. Somewhere out there, Master Gunny Stone was probably conducting late-night security rounds, checking on junior Marines, making sure everyone was safe. Sergeant Griffin would be prepping tomorrow's meals, maintaining the mess hall that served as social center for the entire base. Dr. Cross would be reviewing case files in her office, monitoring the psychological health of personnel who'd never know how much she cared. Connor Hayes would be with his platoon, conducting final preparations for their deployment, using every technique Jordan had taught him to keep his Marines alive. They were all doing their part, following their calling, serving something larger than themselves. Jordan could do no less. She spoke aloud to the empty office, to the Marines in the shadowbox photos, to Corporal Davies, whose death had started this entire journey. "I'll find whoever's responsible at Pendleton. I promise you that. And when I do, they'll face the same justice they've been denying to the Marines they killed." Jordan pulled out a duffel bag and began packing for California. The civilian clothes would come out again, the oversized office attire, the glasses, the posture of someone who didn't belong. She'd become invisible again, overlooked and dismissed, would let people underestimate her while she documented their failures and crimes, would endure whatever psychological warfare they directed at her, because the mission mattered more than her comfort. The mask would go back on. The act would resume. Jordan Blake, incompetent civilian logistics coordinator, would appear at Camp Pendleton on Thursday and begin the careful work of observing, documenting, surviving. But underneath the mask, the warrior remained. The Marine who'd survived 3 combat deployments. the instructor who'd trained hundreds of Marines, the investigator who'd already exposed one corrupt training facility, the person who refused to stop fighting for the people who couldn't fight for themselves. As dawn broke over the Marine Corps Mountain Warfare Training Center, Jordan stood in her uniform one last time before the mission. She faced the flag rising in the distance, the fabric catching the first light of morning. Her salute was crisp, professional, the gesture pure instinct from 12 years of service that would never fully leave her. Then she changed into civilian clothes, packed her uniform carefully, and prepared to become someone else entirely. The war wasn't over. It had just moved to a different battlefield. And this time, Jordan Blake was going in with her eyes wide open, knowing that somewhere at Camp Pendleton, people were watching, waiting, protecting secrets worth killing for. The quiet woman with the clipboard was about to become the most dangerous person on base. They just didn't know it yet. Once a Marine, always a Marine. That was one incredible journey, wasn't it? If this story left you satisfied, we've got another one queued up that's just as explosive. Click the video on your screen right now. A different location, different players, but the same incredible moment when the underdog flips everything upside down. You'll want to see what happens when assumptions get shattered. See you there.